Okay, welcome to our webinar today. We will talk about the tourist management and the COVID-19, about the research priority and changing publishing landscape. And it is so fantastic to see how many of you have joined us today. I'm your host, Candice, from Sage Asia Pacific Marketing Team. And firstly, I'd just like to mention that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared with you some days later via email. So you can watch back the recording if you wish. We've got lots of great topics to discuss today. So let's dive in and welcome our panelists. We have Professor Chris Cooper from the School of Events, Tourism and Hospitality Management at Leeds Beckett University. And we also have Professor Haiyan Song from Hong Kong Polytechnic University, who is the Associate Dean in the School of Hotel and Tourism Management. And finally, Ms. Xuting Wang from Sage Publishing Asia Pacific. Today, after our panelist speech, we will be finishing up with the question and answer section. So if you would like to ask any of our panelists a question, please feel free to type your questions on Q&A board at the right side of your screen. And that's it from me. So we will turn it over to Professor Cooper.
Okay, thank you. I just need to share my screen with you. Okay, can you see the screen? Yeah, good. Okay. Well, for me, it's morning, everyone. I know for some of you it's afternoon. I know for some of you it's evening, and probably for some of you it's good night. But what I would like to do today is to speak about the research opportunities and priorities that COVID-19 presents to the tourism sector. I want to also look at the link between COVID and climate change, and I want to finish by looking at some of the implications of COVID for academic publishing in tourism. So, and I must also make an apology that for some reason these slides have become animated. What we have with COVID-19 and tourism is an unprecedented crisis. We haven't seen a crisis like this for tourism in our own lives, but it's also a transformative crisis. COVID not only is a problem, but it's also accelerated a number of trends which are already happening in the tourism sector. So we all are so familiar with Zoom, so familiar with Microsoft Teams, and I think that will remain with us once the pandemic is finished. So it's accelerating certain trends, accelerating trends of working from home, which is changing the relationship between leisure time and work time. And COVID-19, for tourism, it's a victim and a vector. Yes, it's a victim in terms of the crisis that it's created, but tourism is also a vector of COVID in terms of air travel and people traveling around the world. Certainly, we've had an issue with that here in the UK. So what does that mean for tourism research? As I said, we've had Zoom. What it means is we need to look at pandemics and tourism. What we have here is a global pandemic. So the spread geographically is very wide. It's global. It's spread by transmission from location to location, hence the importance of tourism as a vector of COVID. It has very high attack rates and high death rates. Multiple cases occur very quickly within a short time. And until recently with the vaccines, there has been minimal immunity in the population. Younger people seem to be less affected than older people. And we're seeing new variants, novel variants all the time coming out. So this is a serious issue for tourism and one that really has transformed tourism. So we have two types of response to COVID-19. The first is the pharmaceutical response. Vaccines, which are now being rolled out across the world. And we will have vaccine passports. And they're proving to be quite controversial in terms of how they discriminate between different groups in society. But there's no doubt that the vaccine will be a saviour for tourism. But we also have the non-pharmaceutical response, and this is the one that has been so damaging for tourism, with lockdowns where hospitality, theme parks, attractions are all closed, social distancing, huge impact on reconfiguring destinations, reconfiguring attractions, and changing the relationship, I think, between psychological carrying capacity and social carrying capacity. But I'll come back to that. Closures of businesses, closures of supply chains, cancellation of events, bans of gatherings, such as, say, wedding, and obviously travel bans, which are so harmful for our sector. So what does this mean for research? What I would argue is that there are a number of areas for research, and I know Professor Song will speak about tourist behaviour, so he will deal with the demand side, I will deal with more the supply side, if you like. So for research, social distancing and carrying capacity, the economics of, say, theme parks have been affected, and we're starting to see papers on this coming out now. And we're seeing rebuilding of destinations, pressing that reset button to say, what do we need to do to rebuild our destination after COVID? And I'll talk about this in a few minutes. But of course, when we're looking at research, not all destinations are equal when it comes to the impact of COVID. Some have been much harder hit. So if we think of the game parks in Africa, completely closed, affecting the animals, affecting the economy. Alpine tourism, nothing else they can do. They don't have other options. Coastal tourism as well. So there is lots of research potential out there for tourism researchers. We've gone from over-tourism to under-tourism. And looking at the implications of under-tourism for some destinations is proving a very rich seam of research, and there are a number of papers on this already. Professor Song will speak about forecasts. I won't speak about that. Research on the value chain, as the impact is rippling through right down back to the farmers. Impact on incomes and therefore travel, as people are furloughed, people lose their jobs because of COVID, and impact on businesses as well. So thinking here particularly about participation of employees, the health of employees, there's a lot of work being done on that, the well-being of tourism employees, and businesses in terms of strategic rethinking. Think, for example, of the cruise sector, which has been so hard hit, the airline sector too. But on a brighter side, I would argue that research is also supporting recovery strategies. There are now a lot of papers on how research is supporting recovery to protect jobs in terms of liquidity, protecting jobs, bringing confidence back to protect businesses, opening borders responsibly, and new technologies such as virtual reality in terms of starting to grow much more quickly than it would have without the pandemic. So we're seeing policy response from the international level with the UN World Tourism Organization, the World Travel and Tourism Council. We're seeing it regionally and locally. And we're also seeing it by different sectors. So the event sector, the airline sector are all putting together these strategies which are underpinned by research. And so hopefully we will move with the vaccine, we will move to a new normal. We will start to see something I've spoken of already in terms of the social distancing, and that will become the norm, certainly in this country for probably another at least 12 months. It means restaurants are having to install plexiglass screens. It means staff are being protected with masks. It means deep cleaning, sanitizing will become, has already become the norm in hospitality. Optional cleaning of hotel rooms, we've probably already seen that. Enforced closure as well. Contactless payment for pretty much everything. In the UK, it's unusual now to use cash. Everything is contactless with payments. So the day-to-day operation of tourism is changing, and it's again a rich research theme in terms of how everything is booked in advance, say meals, that type of thing. Just even a simple coffee is now often booked in advance. Domestic tourism at the moment here in the UK certainly is favoured, and I think it is in a lot of countries. Last week we were able to stay in self-contained accommodation, self-catering accommodation. The hotels here are not yet open, but as long as you're not sharing facilities, it's okay. So again, a lot of work there that can be done. So localization, domestic tourism, localization, and this has seen a growth in small tourism businesses. You might expect COVID to hit tourism in a negative way in terms of small businesses, but in fact we've seen a growth in small businesses. So as I said, self-contained accommodation. Equally, work on promotion. There's no point in having all of these systems in place if you don't promote them. Virtual reality, the heritage sector certainly doing a lot of work on replacing physical destinations with virtual, so you don't have to meet people, you don't have to come in contact with people. And we will see vaccine passports. There's a huge theme of research here. Vaccine passports, at the moment there is a thinking that we will start to label destinations red, green and amber, so there'll be a traffic light system for destinations, and that will then depend on the level of quarantine that's required. So a lot of things potentially to look at in terms of tourism, and certainly the tourism journals that are now starting to fill up with this type of material, and I'll talk about that in a second. So plexiglass screens, cabins, greenhouses for social distancing in restaurants, contactless payment for pretty much everything is certainly the experience here, and I'm sure it is in other countries. And new realities taking over from what could be a dangerous physical reality. And the vaccine passport, which I'm sure we will see. I know the European Union is thinking of that. A couple of things from me as well. Firstly, what has become clear to me over the last 2 or 3 months is this link between COVID-19 and climate change and tourism. And I think this is certainly a research priority for us as a group of academic researchers. I'm not going to go into this in detail, but what this diagram is basically saying is that climate hazards are exacerbating, are making the pandemic worse in terms of emergency evacuations and shelters after wildfires or hurricanes, water scarcity, heat waves, but most probably importantly also air pollution. Air pollution, because COVID obviously attacks the lungs and breathing, is a real issue. So let me just, and I think all of these slides will be made available to you. Let me just go through a couple of these points. Firstly, the negative points, if you like. Air pollution exacerbates the impact of the virus, and that affects the less well off, perhaps more. It affects those working because they have to go out into the air. We're also seeing the fact that economies are being hit very hard by the virus. It means that the priorities of, say, the environment in the past are now not as important. So we see the rainforest, illegal logging has come back, and the government is far too busy looking at the impact of the virus, particularly on Brazil, which is probably the worst country in the world for the virus at the moment. And they've taken their eye off the environmental section, if you like. So the environmental policy is weakened. It's also weakened, I think, because in the future, whereas we might have been much harder on the airlines, taxing carbon, I think that will be delayed because the airlines have suffered so much. So I suppose in a playing cards, in a gambling situation, at the moment, what's happened with climate change and COVID is that economics has trumped the environment. We're much more caring, if you like, of the economics. There are more cars around because people are not using certainly here, they're not using public transport because it's deemed to be more dangerous. And only last week I was reading that climate change is changing the distribution of where bats are found, and obviously bats are a carrier of this. So a lot happening in terms of that link between climate change and the virus. So air pollution making things worse, taking the eye off the environmental policy, environmental protection, letting illegal here illegal logging, but there's lots of other examples of this, I think, and redistribution of the bat population, in some places increasing the bat population, but also changing it in terms of where it is found. But there are some good things. We're not travelling as much, or we haven't travelled as much in 2020, which is bad for the airlines, but good for carbon, good for the environment, good for the climate. We're not using the combustion engine as much, or the airline, or the jet engine. We're walking more, we're hiking more. A number of countries, such as the Netherlands, are looking towards green recovery as they move out of COVID. More working from home, so less transport. People moving to the countryside, certainly here in Europe, a trend to move out of the city and move to the countryside. Lockdown, I think, has been a part of that, living more simply. And I suppose good for us, more faith in science and more faith in experts. And so what does all of this mean? We're moving, I hope, to a new tourism when COVID gradually fades. And we have a once-in-a-lifetime chance to build tourism that we can be proud of. And that should be tourism which is built on a foundation of research. Tourism that has reduced volumes, is carbon friendly, is sustainable, and is innovative. That is what I would like to think we will be able to move to once we get back to some semblance of normality. And I suppose my question back to you as an audience is, are we up to the challenge of doing this? I just want to finish with a few slides on something that I have seen over the last probably 6 months, and that is how COVID-19 is impacting on the academic publishing landscape generally, and therefore impacting on you, the audience, as a group of researchers who are looking to publish your work. And what I'm seeing is there is an impact on journal submissions, and I'll talk about that in a moment. There is an impact on the content of those journal submissions, and that is having an impact on the currency, the value of other submissions to journals generally across the tourism field. So let's take the first of those. There has been, with lockdown, since early 2020, a huge increase in papers generally across tourism journals. And that, you might say, is a good thing. But what I'm also seeing is that whilst the quantity has increased, the quality has not. And I'll talk about that in a second. And it's also meant because the quantity has increased, there's more papers around, it's getting harder to get referees to agree to referee papers, just because of the sheer increase in the volume of papers. Now, not only has that impacted on submissions, but it's also impacted on content. There is a COVID-19 and tourism publishing industry now. There are lots of papers coming out. Ones that I'm seeing, many, not all, but a lot of them are premature. We don't know how this thing is going to play out yet. And these are papers which are saying that we do, that they've done a piece of research and this is what will happen. And I don't think that's correct. A lot of them are very original and very innovative. Innovative in looking at, say, landscapes for making you feel happy as a tourist rather than stressed by the virus. So there's lots of really original and innovative stuff out there at the moment. A lot of really good applications of different theories and methodologies to the COVID issue. I'm seeing that. All papers have a very long introduction about pandemics and tourism and COVID and tourism, and they're all the same. So a lot of papers could be sharper and could be tighter. But certainly there's an industry out there in terms of publishing on COVID and tourism. And that's having an impact on other submissions. So if you're not researching tourism and COVID, then that's starting to create a bit of an issue. Some journals, for example, are asking for a COVID perspective in every paper. The view being that it is such a major thing that we can't publish anything on tourism without a COVID perspective. This is also an issue for work that was done perhaps before COVID hit, so work that was done in 2019 on, say, cruise passengers or cruise strategies. The currency of that work, the value of that work, you could argue, has been impacted by COVID because it's effectively rendered historic. And that's the same for empirical papers, which are pre-COVID, because they don't factor in the COVID factor. Because we're seeing so much in terms of the COVID work, it's squeezing space for other content. There isn't as much room in terms of the page budgets of the journals to get other content in because there's just so much COVID stuff coming out now. But what I would argue is that the more conceptual pieces, the literature reviews, the systematic reviews and commentaries, they're still generally okay. They're still good pieces of work that are being published. So to conclude, what I think we have is, sorry, not to conclude, let me just talk about that very quickly. So I've just published this book about 12 months ago, a victim in a sense of publishing too soon because we don't have COVID in there. So this is a synoptic view of tourism in 14 chapters, so a course, effectively a semester's worth of tourism. But there will be a fourth edition in 2022, which is effectively Essentials of Tourism, the COVID issue. So it will start to weave in and fold in the impact of COVID on tourism. And so my concluding slide is basic to say that COVID has changed the game. It's moved the goalposts in tourism research. It's changed the game in terms of destinations and the work we can do on destinations, and it's changed the game in terms of publishing, academic publishing. At the moment it's different. It will change back again, I think, in the next 2 or 3 years, but at the moment COVID is dominating in that publishing sector. I will stop at that point and hand back to the chair and look forward to some questions later on. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Professor, for sharing your insights. So next we'll welcome Professor Song for his part.
Okay.
Hi, Professor.
Okay, thank you. I
Yes.
need to share the screen. So can you see the screen now?
Yep.
Right. You're seeing the presenter screen or the public screen now? All right. Okay. So, Good evening from Hong Kong, and also good morning, good night, and good afternoon from participants from other places. So, Professor Chris Cooper promised you I will talk some of the research areas. I can only deal with 1 or 2, but not all the areas that Professor Cooper promised on my behalf. I will not talking about forecasting this time, although my research area actually include tourism demand modeling and forecasting. In the Chinese saying, actually, 危机 or crisis and opportunities, and that's every crisis actually come with opportunities. Today, I'm going to present some of the research opportunities during the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, and thereafter. So, Professor Cooper already mentioned that COVID-19 actually has had profound negative impact on the tourism industry worldwide. So basically, the world is locked down. There's not much international travel going on at the moment. And also, this impact will be felt far beyond the current pandemic. So because this is once in a lifetime public health crisis, and this crisis actually lasts much longer than many other crises that we have experienced. And as a result, this impact will last much longer than we anticipate. So, and also, especially the industry practitioners, decision makers and policy makers are very desperate for the recovery strategies and solutions. And some of these strategies and solutions may actually coming from research, from educators. So that's why I said, this provides academics with research opportunities. So Professor Cooper actually talked about many new possible research directions, but I will mainly focus on from a demand perspective or from the economics perspective. So the first question we would ask is that although this pandemic is unprecedented and it was much longer, but whether this pandemic actually is a one-off event or will generate one-off impact or long-term impact on tourism and also firm behaviors. But I was mainly talking about whether this will influence the tourist travel behavior as a result. But if this impact is one-off, although it is bigger and longer, in effect, the existing research or existing theoretical framework should still be very useful and relevant to deal with the impact of COVID-19 on tourism, right? The only thing that we need to do is that we include a COVID factor which may influence the travel decisions during this period and maybe right after the pandemic, but then the tourists will return to normal. Professor Cooper already mentioned that the tourists may actually return to a new normal, but we don't know whether it will be a new normal or the memory of tourists will be short and they will forget what has happened during the pandemic and then start doing the same thing as before, right? Or the impact is long-term. But if the impact is long-term, which means the tourists perhaps will change their travel behavior as a result. And the way they look for information, the way they were booking their international travel or accommodations, and also the destinations they will travel to may actually significantly change as a result of this COVID-19. And so if this behavioral change is long-term, then actually the new theories or extension of existing theories will become very necessary. In this case, it will generate new groundbreaking innovative research to actually extend or advance the current research that has been already published or carried out. Okay, so this is the first question I would like to ask. And then I would like to point out some possible research directions. And this actually is very selective. It's not comprehensive at all. It's just from economics perspective, what are the possible research topics, research directions that may become relevant in your future studies. So from I will talk this from a behavioral economics perspective. So in traditional economic research, normally the consumers or tourists are considered to be rational, which means they will make decisions in a predictable manner based on the constraints they may have. For example, which destination the tourist will travel to will depend on his income level, the cost of travel to the destination, and they actually make these decisions very rational. But from what we have seen, especially during this pandemic period, human beings and tourists and travelers are not necessarily all very rational. They do not necessarily behave in a rational manner. Actually, tourists or travelers or consumers are also emotional, which means sometimes they make decisions not in a rational manner, but very emotional, especially if they're facing a crisis, pandemic, and also the pressure, and so on and so forth. So therefore, the traditional economics theory may not be very useful to explain the behavioral changes as a result of a rational emotional consumer, right? So actually, from a behavioral economics perspective, there are many theories and concepts can be used to study the tourism behavior as the result of the impact of the COVID-19. I only probably pick some of these concepts or theories that may be relevant, may need to pursue in terms of looking at the behavioral changes of tourists as a result of COVID-19. The first concept that within the behavioral economics or studied by behavioral economists is a term known as temporary discounting, which means people's perception of certain things actually changes over time. Okay, so their behavior actually change over time as a result of risk changes. For example, do we take immediate reward when we travel to a destination, or we will wait and see after the COVID-19? So many researchers and academics already started to look at after the COVID-19 finish or disappear, whether the tourists actually will suddenly started to travel abroad and release the travel desire and what we call started revenge travel. Or they will wait and see until the COVID-19 crisis or risk has completely subsided. So this is the something that we can start to look at how the tourists was started to travel, to make decisions to purchase international travels, and whether they will start immediately after COVID-19 or open the border is open, or they will still travel and see. One of the example recent analysis that, for example, Macau, because it controls COVID-19 so well, it's not single cases for many months, and also it started to open its border to the Chinese mainland tourists, especially in the GBA area. But actually, there's not a lot for tourism rush into visit Macau. So that's probably is the attitude, wait and see. And they actually will give some time to consider whether they will travel to a certain destination or not, right? And also another behavioral economics term is called loss aversion. Although we love to win, no matter what we're trying to do, we love to win, right? But we also hate to lose much more, even more, which means actually if there's a negative risk or if there's a negative impact of COVID-19 on travel behavior, perhaps the impact will be much bigger, right, than the positive impact. So that's why, when there's a crisis, people become more cautious. They are more risk aversion instead of a risk lover, right? Risk love. So this actually trying to avoid possible damages or risk that may occur when they travel, and therefore their reaction in terms of their demand for travel or their choice of destinations, and also the influencing factors. Actually, the reaction of demand for travel to the influencing factors actually are different between the normal time and also the crisis time. So that's something that the economists can look at, right? So that is what we also call it asymmetric influence of travel decisions by the influencing factors. Another term that has been quite often used in behavioral economics is called anchoring and framing. And this is especially useful for policy making in terms of how the information are transmitted to tourists, and how the information are framed so that the tourist will react to this different framing in terms of information provided by the authorities, for example. So during the pandemic period, how do you frame the information actually will have a profound impact on their decision in terms of whether they will travel or not. And also, as a human being, we are quite often actually relies on the initial information we received, and this actually formed our initial behavior. And then actually, although in the future this information may evolve, may change, but we still actually believe much more in the initial information we received, right? So this actually will have impact in terms of how we receive the COVID-19 information, because nowadays we know there's so much misinformation going around on the COVID-19, and also a lot of conspiracy theories and so on and so forth. We have to be careful, because a human being and also consumers tend to trust the initial information they received very much. So these actually are the things that are relevant to our research, and also another term, which is mental accounting. Basically, as consumers, our decision is based on how much income we receive, right? So actually, the travel decision of tourists is constrained by the income level of a tourist. If they receive a high income, it is very likely they will travel to far away or expensive destinations than if they have a lower income. But the consumers actually sometimes classify their income subjectively, which may lead to irrational expenditures or irrational spending. For example, especially during the COVID-19 period, because certain group of people has been affected much more than others, different organizations and non-government organizations, even sometimes the government, actually trying to establish some sort of policies to encourage people to donate their income or their wealth to support these disadvantaged people. But then how do you design the policy to maximize the donation with a view to helping those people affected actually have important or influence the actual donation of people, whether they would donate based on their regular income or their windfall or their bonus, for example. So they probably will tend to donate much more if they suddenly somehow receive a lot of, extraordinary income. For example, recently the stock market has performed so well, although the economy has been doing very badly, but the stock market somehow has been doing very well. And a lot of people, if they invest in the stock market, actually they can see their returns has been increased significantly. But during this, if they really get this huge additional income, and perhaps they will donate more. So that's will tell us who to target and how actually we design the policy in order to attract more donations to help these people who are affected during the pandemic period. Another term which is also quite often used in behavioral economics, is what we call the social norms. And this actually is a very interesting concept. For example, there are two types of social norms. One is called injunctive norms, which the society hope us to do, versus descriptive norms, what the society actually does. Right? I give you an example in contrast. What do we mean by these two different social norms? For example, in some Western countries, USA, for example, and although the government has been repeatedly saying that you should wear a mask when you go out and keep social distancing, but still there's a lot of people actually do not listen to this calls, and they still actually emphasize other aspects more than protect themselves and protect others. But in Hong Kong, for example, although the government didn't actually call for everybody wear a mask when they go out, but everybody actually wear a mask when they go out. If they don't, they feel ashamed. So that's actually a different social norm in different cultural background, cultural setting. I don't mean to discredit one social norm against another. I think these both are relevant and prevalent in different cultural settings. But this actually will have an impact on the travel behavior, right? Not only actually their behavior in terms of wearing mask, but also perhaps will also affect their behavior in terms of how they will travel, who they will travel with, and where they travel to, right? So this actually is a very interesting topic that was well to explore in terms of looking at different culture and how they shape the social norm, and how these social norms actually influence their behavior and also influence their travel behavior, or their behavior related to hospitality, for example, right? So these are some very interesting things to look at. So these are some possible research topic. It's very selective. It's not actually meant to be comprehensive, all-inclusive. Just trying to point out some possible directions that you may think of. But of course, from those possible research directions, you can extend, amplify to other areas as well when you look into specific research topics. Next, I will present examples or research that we have recently done using some of these concepts and theories. And this paper actually is already published in a Journal of Travel Research, which is a SAGE journal, recently published, actually just published online. It doesn't have a page number yet, but it is published online. So if you are interested in great details of this research, you can certainly go to the website and download the paper and read the study. But I only here I only present the basic background of this research and also the main research findings, and also illustrate how some of these concepts, which I mentioned earlier, are utilized in this piece of research. Okay, so we all know the novel diseases continue to emerge due to urbanization and increase of mobility of population. These actually, many public health crises have occurred over the last 2 or 3 decades, right? SARS, H1N1, MERS, and so on and so forth. And this actually is something to do with urbanization and also the mobility of people. Although Professor Chris Cooper mentioned that it may also have something to do with the climate change, the environment, but certainly it is closely related to urbanization and mobility of population, which has been confirmed by other research. And also tourism is one of the one form of this population mobility. So therefore, actually, tourism can amplify the negative impact if there's a public health pandemic, because they travel from place to places and they carry the virus from one place to another, right? So actually, it is a channel of transmission of public health novel diseases, and this actually is also well known by research done by other academics. So therefore, if tourism can transmit diseases to destinations, and this actually will bring some cost to destinations if the disease actually are brought in or amplified by tourists, because you have to use public health facilities and hospitals if there's more people falling ill, right? So that's the social cost that may bring to the destinations as a result of tourism. So therefore, our research, the key research question is to understand the factors that may influence the local residents' attitude or response towards the policies that trying to mitigate the social cost of tourism in the pandemic. So this actually is a very interesting topic, because tourism can bring the social cost to the destination, but once the pandemic occurs, then we have to control tourism, and then the society, the economy will suffer because there's no tourism income brought in, and sometimes then the government will have to design certain policies to mitigate those social costs as a result of controlled tourism. So this actually is a very interesting topic when initially the COVID-19 emerged early last year in China. So immediately after that, we thought, all right, this is something very interesting. We need to do research to look at how to mitigate or reduce the social cost caused by tourism. And also to prevent and delay transmission of COVID-19, we need to introduce travel restrictions. Actually, Professor Cooper already mentioned that there's a non-pharmaceutical response to COVID-19, one of which is to restrict people from traveling to different places, and also intervention in terms of social physical distancing and shutdown of public and business facilities, especially the tourism and hospitality facilities are affected most. Therefore, our first research objective is to examine the government policies designed to mitigate the social cost of tourism. because the social cost has occurred as a result of intervention and also the travel restriction. And we need to look at what type of the policy need to be designed to mitigate, to reduce, minimize these social costs. So this is one first research objective. And then the second objective at the bottom of this screen is to explore the effect of information framing on residents' attitude towards tourism social cost mitigation policies. So as you can see, this particular research is looking at the policy, the government policy in terms of mitigating the social costs of tourism as a result of these interventions and restrictions. So in order to formulate effective policies, you have to communicate the policy very clearly in a perhaps right manner, so that to increase the public's confidence in your policy, right? So that is done actually through framing. So if you remember, one of the concepts I introduced earlier is framing. So how do you frame the public policy and how to frame the current social cost of tourism as a result of COVID-19 to public, and why you design this policy. It is very important to make sure the policy is effective. So this is actually our second research objective. The third research objective is to look at the influence of framing and mental accounting on residents' willingness to pay for social cost reduction during the pandemic. Remember, this study is to look at the effectiveness of a public policy on reducing the social cost of tourism as a result of restriction, travel restriction, and so on and so forth. For example, especially during the pandemic period, people who are employed in the tourism sector are badly affected. Many of them actually made redundant, right? So their livelihood has been affected. And therefore, different organizations, non-government organizations, and charitable organizations, and the government sometimes actually trying to take some measures to reduce these social costs brought by these restrictions. So and how actually in the society there's still a lot of people are not affected. Actually, some of the people during the pandemic actually are benefited from the situation, especially, for example, the online platforms, retail platforms, and the investor, stock market investors, and these people actually are making money during this period. Of course, they will be willing to help, to donate or to chip in terms of responding to government or charitable organizations to donate their wealth and income to help the people who are affected, right? But how can you actually attract more of these donations to people? And then you need to consider how people actually decide to donate. Who are the people most likely to donate? And this actually is what one of the important concepts we use is mental accounting, to understand how people actually classify their income and which part of their income they are willing to donate more. So that is a concept that we use in this study to look at how effective the policy is to attract different people's response to your call for donation, for contribution their willingness to pay for reducing the tourism related social costs. Actually, so the design for the research, I'm not going to spend too much time, just to let you know. Actually, we have 3 studies. The first study is just to look at, it's a qualitative study to look at the existing literature or existing document to look at what are the policies that has been introduced during the COVID-19 period. And, just to get a feel of the different type of policies being introduced. And also what the cost has brought to the destination as a result of restrictions of tourism travel. And the second study is to look at the effect of framing on residents' attitude towards tourism social cost mitigation policies, right? The third study is to look at the effect of framing and mental accounting on residents' willingness to pay for reducing social costs on tourism during the pandemic. So these are the 3 small studies, all integrated together, actually. These are the, because of time, because of the audience, I'm not going to explain the methodologies, the models that we use, and the experiment we designed to collect the data, but just to present the result. Actually, the data we collected about 2,000 response from 3 cities within China during the COVID-19 period. One city is Wuhan, one city actually is Guangzhou, another city is Hong Kong. Actually, 3 cities. So about 2,000, more than 2,000 respond. Every city will have about 600 to 700 response. So these are some of the results. Again, this is very selective presentation in terms of the results. But if you're interested in the detailed study, you can look at our paper. So first, positive framing induced respondents' positive bias in favor of proposed policy measures as compared to the negative framing. So you have to frame your policy positively to attract more donations or positive response. And also respond who are employees in the tourism-related industry or currently residing in the cities with more confirmed cases of COVID-19 perceive the policy measure is less effective. I don't know why this is the case, but it's obviously perhaps this is to do with the people in this city has already suffered too much, and they are constantly facing the negative information all the time, how many confirmed cases, how many people died. So they actually perhaps, whatever the policy you design, whatever the framework you use, perhaps it is not very, not as effective as if the policy is introduced in other cities where there are less confirmed cases. And also, residents' willingness to pay for reducing the social costs of tourism in the pandemic through donations is influenced by mental accounting. And also, they are more likely to donate if their income comes not from their regular salary, but from other sources. So this is interesting, but also expected research outcome. So in terms of contribution, this study contributed to the debate on the effectiveness of different type of public policies in fighting against COVID-19 pandemic. It has also contributed to the literature on residents' attitudes towards public policy designed to mitigate the social cost of tourism and their behavioral purchase intention. But purchase intention here, donation intention. Okay, and also framing information positively will help to the public policy to actually help to maximize the effectiveness of public policy. Okay, and also in addition to this, donation, government anti-pandemic bonds could also be offered to residents to reduce social cost of tourism during the pandemic. So in addition to the contributions called by non-government charitable organizations, actually the government can also issue anti-pandemic bond, which is also kind of help to monetary help to the destinations were affected. Okay, this is actually just a piece of research that we have done for your information, just to stimulate your research interest. But before I'm concluding, actually, I will use this opportunity to introduce two important journals published by SAGE. One is Tourism Journal of Travel Research, which is a very well-known, very important journal. Actually, it's one of the top 3 highly regarded journal in tourism and hospitality research. Actually, it is a Q1 journal, which means, as very top of the ranking, and the impact factor is very high. Is 2-year average impact factor is more than 7.7, and actually recently attract quite a lot of submissions related to COVID-19 research. Another journal also published by SAGE is Tourism Economics. It's also an important journal, especially in economics area, tourism economics area, and although it is in the Q2 area of this journal, but this does attract a lot of good research from tourism economists, and the impact factor is 1.8, is quite good. And actually, currently, I was invited as a guest editor of a special issue for tourism economics. And the deadline for this special issue, the submission deadline, actually is 31st of April 2021. So we still have about 2 weeks, a little bit more than 2 weeks for people to submit to this special issue. If you have done a very good research related to tourism economics or economic geography research, please do consider submit your study to this special issue. These actually are some of the areas listed here, but actually the submission are not restricted or limited to these areas that are listed here. But if you think your research is relevant, is related to consumer tourism behavior, or even to the supply side, firm behavior, or destination management related to, for example, competitiveness, or destination impact of the COVID-19 on the tourism in the destination, please do consider submit to this special issue. This will be a very important channel for you to disseminate your research. I think probably I have talked more than I should do, so I finish here. Be happy to answer any questions. Actually, it's a bit over time, but I guess that should be okay.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Song. So by now, I believe our audience have lots of key takeaways. And I can see there have been already many questions in our Q&A board. We will answer the questions at the end of our webinar. So now let's welcome Xuting for next part.
Hi, it seems I can't share. Can the host put
yeah, Xuting, just wait. Yeah, wait a moment, please. Okay, Xuting. Okay. Yeah, please go ahead.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Okay, good morning, Professor Cooper, Professor Song. good evening to Professor Song, and hi everyone in the meeting room. I'm Xu Ting. I'm the manager for journal commissioning and book rights at Sage Asian Pacific, based in Beijing office. I'm very glad to join the tourism management webinar, and thank you very much, Professor Cooper and Professor Song, for your very inspirational presentations. I think Sage is really honored to have you as journal editor and book author. So I'm going to talk about how Sage facilitates researchers in academic publishing. I'll be making good use of the 10 minutes. So for people who do not know much about Sage, Sage is an independent, preeminent HSS publisher and a faster-growing STM publisher. In terms of journal publishing, we now publish more than 1,100 journals, among which 700 journals are in humanities and social science area. Here on the screen, I'm sharing some leading journals on tourism and hospitality research. According to the 2020 Journal Citation Report, SSCI collection by Collaborate Analytics, there are 29 tourism, leisure, and hospitality relevant journals. And here on the screen, we can see the top 10 journals in this area. These are published by different publishers, including Elsevier, Emerald, Taylor Francis, and Sage. So at Sage, we have 7 most relevant journals on tourism and hospitality research, including the Journal of Travel Research, the Official Journal of Tourism and Travel Research Association, and also Sage's proprietary journals, Tourism Economics. Just now, Professor Song mentioned these 2 journals, and I understand Professor Song sits on the editorial board of these 2 journals. I will be guest editing one special issue for Tourism Economics. Thank you very much for your contribution, Professor Song. Next, I would like to extend my talk a bit beyond the journals on tourism and hospitality research. Here on the screen, I share with you a small portion of Sage Business and Management journals. So Sage publishes more than 80 journals in business and management, including the Journal of Management, Australian Journal of Management, California Management Review. I know and understand that some of the journals also welcome articles relevant to tourism and hospitality research. But please go to the submission guidelines webpage of a specific journal you might be interested to submit your manuscript to, and check if your manuscript content fits the scope of a specific journal, and follow the submission guidelines to prepare your manuscript. And Sage Open is a peer-reviewed, open-access, multidisciplinary journal we launched in 2011. It publishes research articles and review articles spanning social science and behavioral sciences. So as of now, we have published 250 articles relevant to tourism and hospitality research. So authors can enjoy the benefits of very quality reviews, efficient production, global marketing and distribution, and of course, readers can have immediate and free access to the content. The journal is now indexed in SSCI and other key indexing services. At Sage, we care very much about the author's needs and their publishing experiences with our journals. So we put together the Journal Author Gateway, which is designed to help with authors' submission and publication journey. On the Author Gateway, there are a series of resources on how to get your article published, including a downloadable guide, the links to how to choose a journal and how to submit your article videos. We also provide author submission guidelines, publication ethics, and peer review process, etc. So please click and check the Author Gateway for more information if you are interested. So Sage Journal Recommender is a tool that helps authors to find the right journal based on their title and content. Authors can go to the website and key in the titles, keywords to search over more than 1,000 journals and compare those most relevant journals to your manuscript. And the results could be limited to journals which are indexed or open access journals or journals that participate Sage Path, which is a free article transfer service providing expert advice on preparing your manuscript to the journal, which might be the best fit to your manuscript. I would like also to share with you some other digital resources here at Sage for business and management schools, helping academic researchers, instructors, and students with their research in teaching and learning. So Sage Business and Management Cases provides you more than 4,000 cases for students and teachers to discuss in their class. Sage ebook platform hosts more than 5,000 titles, and we have 500 plus titles in business and management. Here I show you the cover of books authored by Professor Cooper. The Sage Handbook of Tourism Management is hosted on our e-platform. Apart from the Sage Business and e-books, we also provide academic collections of videos to adapt to the environment of online teaching and learning. So the Sage Research Methods video, market research, basically tells you the techniques on how to collect and analyze data. And the video business and management collection, video leadership connections, basically provide the professional knowledge in the format of short video and deliver the knowledge in a more engaging way. So all these resources are hosted on one single platform called Sage Knowledge. So we welcome researchers, instructors, and students to click and check. So that's all for my presentation. Thank you for your listening. And if you have any queries about Sage Journals, please contact me. And if you are interested in trial to the business and management resources, you can contact my colleague via the email address on the screen. And for people in mainland China or who people use the WeChat, we'd welcome you to follow us, the Sage News, by scanning the QR code on the screen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Xuting. So let's come to the Q&A session. We have 9 questions in total, and for the first question 1 to 4 is for Professor Cooper, and following questions 5 to 8 are for Professor Song, and the last one I have a question for Xuting. So can I share my screen? Yes, so can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, so let's start from question 1 for Professor Cooper.
Okay. Yes, I agree that the travel bubbles have been really an issue because of opening up travel prematurely. I think what we hopefully will see as we move into the future will be a more cautious approach. I spoke of the traffic light approach when I did my presentation, and that's the way the UK is going. So green, you won't have to quarantine if you visit a country. Amber, there will be a certain degree of quarantine, and red will be quite severe and expensive quarantine. So I think the question there about is it damaging to gain trust, I think is very interesting. It's this issue of balancing risk and opportunity, if you like. So I think what we will see is more caution, and I think the travel bubbles will continue to be established, but in a more cautious way. I don't know if you've got anything on that as well.
Yeah, I think you answer perfectly, so I don't have any further addition.
Okay.
Okay, so let's on to question 2.
I haven't seen a great deal on the views of travellers towards vaccine passports. What we are seeing here in the media is a backlash against vaccine passports because they seem to be discriminatory against those people who have not been vaccinated. So there is talk here in the UK of having to show some sort of vaccine ID before you're allowed into a football game, or even before you're allowed into a restaurant. That will be quite discriminatory, and I think is going to cause quite a lot of social unrest if it comes to pass. So at the moment, I haven't seen a lot on vaccine passports, but I think it will become, if they're introduced, and the European Union is already looking at this, I think if they are introduced, it will be a very interesting area of research, particularly in terms of those that are excluded by this.
Okay, so next question is, can you see the question 3?
Okay.
Yep.
I think if you're doing research on entrepreneurs, then there are a number of angles you can take. And my strong advice would be work in your disciplinary comfort zone. If you're a geographer or an economist or a sociologist, depending what your background is, orientate your research into that direction. I think the whole area of entrepreneurship in cities is a really interesting one. And as I mentioned in my presentation, what we've seen in this country is a growth of entrepreneurs from people who have been in lockdown, come up with an idea, and then established a small business. So it's a really interesting area in terms of linking entrepreneurship with innovation as well. But as I say, what I would be looking at is my host discipline, if you like. I'm a geographer, for example, so I think like a geographer. I think about places, I think about destinations, I think about links, and I think that would be my strong advice. I'm always very, very reluctant to guide people into a particular area of research, because research has got to come from you. It's got to come from the heart if it's going to be successful.
Yes, thank you. And now we have question 4.
Right. That's a very, very big question. And it almost takes us outside of the scope of this webinar. I do quite a lot of sessions with students on tourism futures, and COVID obviously is part of that. And what I am increasingly seeing is that technology will be the key to the future of tourism. And so I think the skills, the must skills for tourism students in the future will be technological ones. I think we might see a tuning back of pure tourism content in courses and tourism skills, if you like. I mean, what are tourism skills? They're generic skills, really. And I think it's going to be programming skills and this type of thing that students in the future, people working in tourism in the future, not necessarily the next 2 or 3 years, but the next 10, 15 years, that's going to be absolutely key. And we are already seeing technology being used to combat COVID, but also to extend tourism products to combat COVID. I mentioned different realities, that type of thing. So a massive question and a tricky one to answer. And what I think we need is a shift in the tourism curriculum to cope with this. And that might
thank you. Yes, thank you. So now we have the question 5 from Professor Song.
All right. Okay. So what are the key factors to attract international tourists post-COVID-19? I think the key factors, most of the key factors will still remain the same. For example, tourist income, the cost of travel to destinations, and also the cost in the destination, and also substitute costs in alternative destinations. These are still the key economic factors will influence future tourist travel. But at the same time, perhaps the health concerns will be important factors in the future in terms of determining where tourists will travel to. Therefore, in terms of public health facilities and maybe the public services, public health services in the destination will also play a role, and this can be integrated as a risk factor in international tourism demand. So I think this perhaps is something that will be worthwhile to look at in terms of affecting international tourist travel decisions.
Yes, thanks. And let's go on to question 6.
Okay. Can you please share what are the possible differences in travel behavior in West as compared to Asia? All right. Actually, this is a very interesting question. Actually, there has been a lot of research done in this area, looking at the cultural difference and how the cultural difference influence the travel behavior, either in terms of a selection of destinations or the behavior when they are in the destination. As we know, one of the important cultural difference is that in Western culture, individualism is a key social norm, right? So it is recognized as an important culture or norm, where in Western in Asia, people actually are more behave in a collective manner, which is a collectiveness. So these actually are two different types of cultures. Therefore, their travel behavior tend to be different. Western countries, they tend to select an independent traveler type of travel, where in the Asian culture, people tend to go for group travel, because these two cultural influences. And of course, their perception of pandemic and especially COVID-19 pandemic are different, which I already explained earlier, and therefore the influence of pandemic may also have a different influence on the way people will travel from different cultural background. I think these are some very interesting areas that need to be looked at. I think I actually myself are thinking of doing some research in terms of the differences of travel behavior between Western and Eastern tourists.
Okay, thank you. And now we have question 7.
This actually is a practical question. It's not actually a research question. I think the government can introduce various of stimulus schemes. For example, social pandemic bonds, which is a monetary incentive, and also encourage, maybe introduce favorable policies towards tourism and hospitality businesses, because these businesses currently suffered considerably. Many of them actually have already been closed for quite a long time. Therefore, the government need to have a financial support to those businesses to at least stay put and sustain until the COVID-19 situation is getting better. This is not a particular research question, but it's actually a policy or practical related question. I think probably Professor Cooper will be more qualified to answer this question than I do.
Okay, so anything to add on, Professor Cooper?
No, I think Professor Song has covered it really. The only areas that I see in terms of research is where the research, particularly in economics, underpins how tourist operators can be assisted. What are the points of in a sense, where the policy can intervene? So that's the key, I think. Yeah, no, I think Professor Song's answer was fine. Was perfect.
Okay, thank you so much. And we now have question 8. So, Professor Song, please go ahead.
Macau border lifted, but no, yeah, I think this is exactly what I meant by consideration of risk by tourists when they decide to travel. Although both Macau and the neighboring cities have controlled the pandemic very well, but still the intention or actual travel to Macau from China is still not actually come back to pre-COVID-19 period. Actually, it's a long way to go. I think this is actually tourist behavior somehow has changed. They are more cautious, they are more risk aversion, and they probably adopt a wait and see attitude towards international travel. And I think this is something that Macau government or business need to introduce policies or incentives, even marketing efforts in China or even many other countries where the COVID-19 situation has been controlled. So promotion and the policy probably are the things that the Macau government industry can do to encourage travel. And probably will take time. I don't think it will immediate. Probably will take some time, unless Hong Kong is open, because many of the international travel to this GBA area, actually they travel to Hong Kong and Macau at the same time. So if Hong Kong is not opened, Macau will be affected. Once Hong Kong is opened, Macau will benefit. That's what we call the spillover effect. So, that's my 2 cents. May not be exactly answer your question, but that's what I thought.
Yes, thank you. And we have one more question for Professor Song. It's question 9.
Why is there a big disconnect between tourism entrepreneurship and research in tourism journals? And the entrepreneurship field is entrepreneurship journals. Yeah, I think probably this is not many researchers looking at this particular research area. I know one of my previous students who graduated from PolyU, then went on to City University in London, and she actually looking at entrepreneurship, and then she published in entrepreneurship journals instead of tourism journals. I think perhaps this is an area that many of you can start to look at. Actually, entrepreneurship is very important, especially during the COVID-19 period. There's a lot of business closed down, but also some new business are actually being started. This is a new business actually much to do with entrepreneurship. There's a lot of entrepreneurs take this opportunity to develop new business models and start new business, and they actually benefited as entrepreneurs in this particular COVID-19 period. I think that, this is something that we should look at.
Okay, cool. And so we now have a question for Xuting. Our question.
Yes.
Yes, and here is your question. Can you see for question 10?
Okay. I think I'm not best placed to answer these questions. Maybe academic editors of journals is best placed to answer this question. But just to share with you my experience of seeing the contents published by our journals. I think I research based on some region or some country is still welcome as long as in terms of methodology, research methods, it's sound and scientific, and it has implications for practice or problem solving in other places of the world. So I think maybe Professor Song and Professor Cooper could share your views on these questions.
Sure. Yeah, I think definitely still appealing. I think if you look at the papers published in all tourism journals, actually the authors are from different parts of the world, and also the research topic may be related to a particular research region or location, but international researchers are very much interested in what is happening for example, in China or in Hong Kong, as long as your research has a scientific value. Methodology is rigorous, and the research is relevant, and also, can be generalizable to other destinations. I think that's absolutely still you can publish in international journals, even you're doing research related to a particular location or context.
I think that's right, Hein, but I also feel that there is a danger of reverting back to case study research. And if we're looking at a particular single destination or a single context, I think it's important that you can generalize from that to say, what does this mean for other destinations? What does this mean for other tourism countries? I think tourism research has grown out of the case study approach. It was very common, say, 10 or 15 years ago, and I think we've come away from that now. Yes, localization, contextualization is important, but I think, as everybody said, the rigor of the paper of the research is going to be really important, and the ability to generalize from it is key. Otherwise, it's just yet another study of another place.
Okay, thank you. And I think we have one more question, and it's also the last question for Professor Cooper and Professor Song. It's about compare the pre-COVID data with the post-COVID world.
Okay, that's one for you, Hein.
Okay, I can have a go first, and you can add if you have more. I think yes. This is a very good question, especially in economic research. Before COVID-19, actually, if you are using econometric or statistical method to look at the consumer behavior or tourist behavior, normally the data are quite stable in terms of the structure. But after COVID-19, everything actually stopped, and then tourism demand, tourism travel almost come to a stop. And this actually will influence our research if we include the COVID-19, the data during the COVID-19 period. It actually would distort the relationship that during the normal period. And therefore, you suggest that whether we should actually just using the data up to before COVID-19, right? And if your research is to discover the relationships between different economic activities or variables as a study, that's fine. But then if your research is to look at what is going to happen after the COVID-19 or during the COVID-19 period, you cannot discard this data. For example, I've been doing a few studies recently on tourism forecasting. And it is crucial that you need to predict what is going to happen during this period and beyond, because the researchers and the practitioners want to know what is going to happen. So as a researcher, you are obligated to provide insight for practitioners, academics, and therefore you have to use this data. But then, because this distort the normal relationship, then some judgmental input needs to be used. For example, we use a Dolphy judgmental adjustment approach, considering different scenarios as a result of this pandemic, and then look at how it is recovered within these different scenario boundaries in the future. So yes, if you are purely looking at the relationship during the normal period, yes, you can use the data before the COVID-19, but as a researcher, I think we need to respond to these changes and to look at how these changes influence or distort the normal relationship, and why, and how this distortion can be reverted, and how to revert this distorted relationship in order to guide practitioners in terms of recovery strategies and recovery decisions and so on and so forth. Okay, this is my thought on this question. I don't know whether Professor Cooper agree or not.
No, I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so anything to add on? No? Yeah, cool. So thank you so much for your explanation. And I think that was our last question for today. And if you love to ask questions in the Q&A session, we'll be working through this and get back to you as soon as we can. And you can also visit our website. We have lots of information on which we will be able to answer your questions. And we also have a great series of resources about business and management. So be sure to check this out on our website. And also please follow us on WeChat, Facebook, or LinkedIn for more academic support and the latest news. If you registered today's session, we will also be sending you an email which contains this webinar's recording and other materials. There will be a survey after you leave this webinar, and we are very appreciated if you fill in the questionnaires. And our apologies that we are not able to answer all your questions today. But once again, thank you so much for joining us today and all for our today's webinar. And thank you, and see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Professor Song and Professor Cooper. This is a very great presentation. Yeah, very appreciate your insights.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. May I ask a question? For your presentation slides, can we share in the PDF version?
No problem. No problem.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, bye. See you.
Bye-bye. Thank you again.